first time I saw Crimson Peak, I saw it in theaters when it came out. And I went, funnily enough, with my boyfriend and his sister. And I didn't know what I was getting myself into really with the movie. Oh, and I didn't know that the incest was going to be so, incesty. And looking back, I think I should have realized that the relationship wasn't going to last, and it didn't. And the reason, oddly enough, we broke up was because I was like, you spend all of your free time with your sister and not with me.
Ooh.
So I have a real personal connection to this film. I feel like Guillermo del Toro just understands my soul here.
Oh, he does.
Yes. Welcome to Shadow and Light, a film podcast with Molly and Sarah. I'm Molly.
And I'm Sarah.
And today we're talking about Crimson Peak, which... First of all, I'm so excited we're finally doing delTOber.
Yes.
I mean, we've
my
been
gosh.
talking about this for years now, and the stars have aligned, the moths have congregated in one singular area, and we can finally discuss
moths.
this. Yes, we can enjoy Halloween and all the films of Guillermo del Toro. And
yes. Saint Gilly.
Oh my gosh. I say jokingly, like, we just stand like we're just super fans of a bunch of, people just in passing. But Guillermo del Toro is one person that I love with all of my heart, and I could talk about him for hours. Like, he is a saint in my eyes, and I mean...
Yeah. He's incredible.
He's
so creative, and he works so hard. And every movie he does, he practically kills himself working so hard. He'll be up, all hours. He will barely sleep or eat. He's just totally invested, and you can see that the level of detail in his movies is just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in this movie because I think he said in some interviews, and I watched a ton of interviews, that this is the most heavily designed of all of his films.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, up to The Shape of Water. I don't know where the comparison is there, but. No, he's just incredible, and his films are incredible, and so sincere, and not at all cynical.
Absolutely.
Which is incredible because of the subject matter that he tackles, which we're going to get into.
It's pretty tough.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, speaking of tough subject matter, remember you and I, when we first started to be friends, when we were in the English department together, we had some kind of conversation where... Oh, we like our incest not...
Oh my God.
Remember that?
Yeah.
We like our incest where it was not unspoken or what was the word
I
you
like
used?
my incest when it's implied, not... And
yeah, then that lady.
Yeah, we were in... This, it was like the two of us in the classroom, and other students were starting to sort of trickle in. And our professors also, that we had for that particular class, was really into film. I don't know how we got on this subject. Maybe I think we were talking about Crimson Peak.
I think we were, yeah.
Because the Guillermo del Toro At Home with Monsters exhibit was in town.
That's right, okay.
And you had gone the opening night, and I was going with a friend of ours, of the following weekend, because I didn't really know when it was happening. And I mean, I'd only seen Pan's Labyrinth and I think Crimson Peak at that point, and I wasn't fully indoctrinated like I am, obsessive cult member that I am now.
It's a problem.
And so it was one of those that we talked about because we'd both seen it, and I had mentioned that I didn't love Crimson Peak, mainly because I didn't love, initially I should say at that time, that the incest was so explicit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, I like my incest implied, because I feel like with a lot of classic Gothic romance and Gothic horror, you have to sort of guess. Like in Carmilla, you have to sort of guess the nature of the relationship versus having it be played straight.
Yeah.
And also, I just love ghosts and monsters, and the marketing for the movie sets it up a certain way, and it's not really what the film is.
I remember there was, which, do you want to get to that now, or do you want to talk about that later?
I mean, I think I have a quote, and I don't know where it is, but I think,
you have a lot of notes.
I have a lot of notes. I watched so many interviews. Oh, he said... When it comes to marketing films, you have to sort of watch with faith and horror. I think it was sort of the specific phrase he said. It was from a Talks with Google interview. I think I wrote it down. Anyways.
But it was marketed as horror, but it's not really horror. What is it? It's more like romantic Gothic.
Or he insists that this is a Gothic romance.
Yeah.
And I sort of think, I mean, what he said is they got one part of the film really right, playing up sort of the supernatural element, but it's a hard movie to market just because because Gothic romance is such a specific
you almost have to be a literary nerd to actually kind of enjoy it to its fullest extent. Like, if you watch it and you've read, the Brontes, then you immediately see the connection. And if you're not, interested in that or don't have any knowledge of it, the film is going to make a little bit less sense to you and have a lot less significance, I think.
Well, and I can give you a complete list of his influences. Yeah. We can just run over those quickly because in an IGN interview, he sort of, all the interview is just talking about those influences. And so he talks about Anne Radcliffe and Matthew G. Lewis, and those are two of the real founders of the Gothic romance movement before the 1800s. And then Le Fanu, but he mentions Uncle Silas a lot, and I haven't read that. I've only read Carmilla. And then he loves Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, Great Expectations, E.T.A. Hoffman. And then the first film he ever saw in theaters was Laurence Olivier's Wuthering Heights at the age of 4.
What?
And I know. His mom took him to the theater in Mexico, and that was his first in-theater film. And
that's an early start.
Yeah, he said he fell asleep and then woke up and was terrified by what was happening.
Gosh, poor guy.
But that, I think, really sort of was the germination of this love that he has for Gothic romance.
He had a pretty early foundation for all that stuff.
And then he references films like The Spiral Staircase and Dragon, which we talked about
last week.
And then also there's some more, in terms of the way the film looks, Hammer House.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mario Bava, who did Black Sabbath and Black Sunday, which are more Italian horror films, that have those bright colors. And he said, I think he's done, he did about a dozen, I think, different colorings of the film because he wanted it to have that, CinemaScope look.
Oh, it pops. It is in full Guillermo Technicolor. I mean, it's really, you look at it and you go, that's a color scheme that he would use.
Yes.
Not necessarily that's repeated, but the high saturation, the depth of the shadow is just so stunning and beautiful. I'm captured by it every time I see any of his films, but rewatching this yesterday and a little bit today, I was just so blown away by the sumptuousness of the visuals and
the colors
and her dress. I mean, the yellow dress when just unbelievably beautiful.
Yeah, and we can get to the costumes and stuff later.
Those are incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the best way to sort of tackle this movie is to interweave the little pieces that I have about the details that went into making the film, and then we can talk about things after as you're leading us through the plot because you've seen it more recently than I have. I spent a lot of my time on this. Although, before we start, fact that blew my mind, Benedict Cumberbatch was supposed to be Thomas Sharp.
Ooh, that would have been interesting.
That would have been full Vincent Price and Dragon Wig.
Yeah, pretty much.
I was going to call him delTOber. Yeah, I don't think I have the article where he talks about it. It might actually be in here. Yeah. We might get to it later. But basically, when Tom Hiddleston came on the project, then that's when you sort of get that teenage emo sort of not really developed Thomas Sharp versus what would have been a very Vincent Price and Dragon Wig.
I think
Thomas
this worked
Sharp.
better because it connects with the child abuse and that whole element, which is we'll get into. That's insane,
but I do think it would have been so interesting with Cumberbatch.
He would have been great too. Yeah, oh God, he would have been great in that too. Yeah, I wish he would do another project with GDT because that's just that would be fantastic. So do you want to just go through it fairly chronologically?
Yeah, that sounds good.
And then you can jump in at any point. It's hard to encapsulate this in just a quick summary because the film is so complex and so rich. And, when I was watching it, I was writing notes. I was stuck on every detail and I thought this is going to take me forever to get through this whole movie. So, the thing that I really liked actually right off the bat, from the trailer too, is the moment when it's Edith, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, when she's a little when she's a little girl and after her mother has died of, I believe it was cholera, the ghost of her mother visits her and she's terrified. And I thought that was kind of peculiar because, you'd think a ghost of your parent would be not a positive thing, but a kind of way to connect with them, maybe someone that you wanted to reconnect with. But it's she was absolutely terrified, and not just because of maybe the visual of the ghost, but maybe there was something else going on there. That's never really revealed, but it just, I found it kind of creepy, and especially the way the mother kind of, climbs into bed with her and puts that horrible, creepy, ghost-like hand. It looks like a tarantula kind of, but it's the wispy ghost hand thing. When the trailer first came out, the teaser trailer, I watched that a million times because I was so fascinated by that weird imagery. So, I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that? What does that signify, or?
Something we can kind of get into with the ghosts, and that he mentions here so he did a really long panel called with Toxic YouTube is a channel, or YouTube Talk, something like that. And what he mentioned when it came to the ghosts specifically is that he didn't want the ghosts to have any sort of Judeo-Christian value to them.
Yeah, that's good.
And a ghost isn't a signifier of good or evil, it just is.
Ah.
And how all the ghosts in the film, like, they're creepy to look at, but it's sort of this subversion where you expect the ghost to be, you know, a typical paranormal activity ghost, when actually they're trying to help her, and the real monsters are people. And so I think at the beginning, it's never really explained if there is some kind of deeper significance to why she would be scared of the mother, beyond just that the ghosts always signify this trauma and this past that they have to get past.
Okay.
And something he says that's really beautiful, that is a larger theme, I think, in some of his works, is that he isn't religious at all. But he says the two forces he believes that make up the universe are love and fear. Being in love gives you access to the future. If you believe in fear, you are anchored to your past. And ghosts always just, and what we see in the house, the ghosts are always reminders of a past that you have to come to terms with, or you'll become one as well, essentially. So that's what I think you sort of see as a precursor to what is going to come at the beginning with those ghosts. But, I mean, it's so well done.
It is very
the
well
hand,
done.
Again, this is something we're going to get to the next 4 weeks that we talk about Guillermo del Toro films, is his use of practical effects is just incredible. And once you see a Guillermo del Toro film that just melds it so well, it makes crappy CGI so much worse.
Oh, absolutely.
Or, like, for instance, I just saw It Chapter 2, and most of the monsters, almost all of the monsters that chase after the adults, that are like, bleh, they're mostly all CGI. Or you can tell when it's CGI and it doesn't work.
Oh, that's a shame.
And then you're not scared. You don't have that visceral horror. It doesn't even need to be like a jump scare, but there's something so terrifying about the way he's able to use practical effects and then just put maybe a slight sheen or like a wisp of a part of the ghost coming off of the human that's acting that part. That just makes it really so much more bone-chilling.
Yeah, kind of a heightened reality almost. Yeah, I thought that was really magical. I like how when you first start watching the film, it pretty much establishes a lot of the symbolism right off the bat. And then it keeps kind of repeating and echoing all of that, like the moths and the butterflies right off the bat too. And you know, I was thinking the moths, like right after she sees the ghost of her mother for the first time, she's in the hallway and there's like all these moths like right around this light, and I'm like, I feel like that's a symbol for Edith and the way that she's kind of drawn to ghosts, and she's drawn to Thomas and all this terrible stuff that happens at Crimson Peak. Like she's a moth to the flame.
Yeah. So,
and I don't know if that's accurate to assume that, but that's immediately what I thought with that symbolism. I
mean, it's one definite interpretation of it, and so we should talk about Lucille and Edith have an exchange. So after Edith has met Jessica Chastain and Tom Hiddleston, they're in the park and they have just this exchange, and I think Lucille collects the butterflies or something like that, which is interesting. It would be cool to write a paper and about how popular butterfly collecting was and how that was associated with women during that time. That's not what we're here to discuss. But Lucille has sort of a monologue, and the way Guillermo del Toro talks about it is that Lucille sees herself as this moth that's just devouring these butterflies, and through these wives we find out, spoilers, that Tom Hiddleston collects. And he had this quote that he says, butterflies can be brutal too. And so, but that motif you're talking about of butterflies and moths, that's what the shoulder pads are all about. Is sort of giving them wings. And so when, near the end of the film, when Edith, catches Lucille and Thomas in the act, and Lucille's chasing after her, her robe sort of opens up like these wings, and it's supposed to sort of emulate that, like this.
Interesting.
I know.
The sleeve thing I didn't get before. Now that it totally makes sense. I mean, like all those giant puffy sleeves. I mean, I kept joking to myself as I was watching it, quoting Napoleon Dynamite. I like your sleeves. They're real big. Yeah. You need to see that. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of, I didn't really understand the significance of those gigantic puffy sleeves, but now I kind of do. Right, because those are they fit the aesthetic Guillermo del Toro was building, but that, I don't feel like those giant sleeves were definitely not a norm of the costuming during that time. Not for the average woman, I don't think. I love how she wears glasses. I don't know why the Victorian glasses thing on women, I just think that's the coolest because it implies intellectualism. To see that on a woman is really great because women are kind of not supposed to be intellectual. Women are not supposed to have that kind of device, basically. And here she is wearing and using glasses pretty much all the time throughout the film. And I thought that was kind of a great comment. I mean, aesthetically it looks amazing, but also I feel like there's something going on there deeper with her intellectualism.
Well, and not only that, it's a very physical symbol of a lot of the themes he's also talking about, because the film takes place in 1901. That's the year Queen Victoria dies. New century, you know, we're a decade and a half away from World War One. There's this huge technology change, and the future is sort of in this technology. And so that clash between the past and the future, which is emblematic within the relationships of the three main characters, is also their sort of interior struggle with past and the future is sort of branches out or echoes out into the larger world. Yeah. And so we see Edith in the glasses, I should say, immediately at the beginning, because she's looking at photographs with the Hoctor, who's played by Charlie Hunnam in this film.
Oh, he's lovely.
No facial hair. There's no facial hair in this film. I mean, we can't get everything. We have Tom Hiddleston's butt. We can't get everything.
If we got the Hiddlebutt, we don't necessarily need
As Stephen Colbert called it, his English countryside.
Oh, yes. I remember that interview. That's priceless.
It's so good.
That is the best ever.
So we are introduced to Edith. And do you want to talk about do you want to set up the beginning of the film? Well, yeah, where they're at?
Publishing thing is kind of interesting, and they didn't really talk about that much. I mean, as the film goes on, there are references to that, her being a writer, and
she wants to be a Mary Shelley,
basically, yeah. And I thought that was kind of an interesting conversation with the socialites. Oh, little Jane Austen. She's like, I prefer to be Mary Shelley. Thank you very much, basically.
And she becomes Mary Shelley.
Yeah, basically, in every sense of the word. And I thought that was kind of interesting to show the, relationship with the publisher, played by Jonathan Hyde. I love him so much, a.k.a. Van Pelt from the original Jumanji movie. And showing that kind of perception of, oh, you're writing this really cool piece, but hey, there should be a romance in there. And she's like, well, that's dumb, and basically leaves. So I think that is an interesting take. It's pretty quick, but it's kind of a reference to, this is what women who wanted to further their careers as a writer, that's what they faced, and that's very realistic. And then the way that Thomas breaks her heart is, he sort of says, oh, this is, your writing is ridiculous and sentimental, you don't know anything about love and everything. And it's we find out later that he doesn't believe that about her writing, but it's interesting to see her relationship with men in relation to her writing play out.
Yeah. And so we should say that these English people come, and the story at first takes place in New York. Yeah. And she, is immediately entranced by Tom Hiddleston.
Who isn't?
And he looks at her. And so the father at the beginning sort of figures out what Tom and Lucille are up to, and then, they're looking for investors for this.
But he gets a detective.
He does.
Played by Vern Gorman, the love of my life, with his giant cheekbones, and kind of a bumbling detective type, chewing sweets and holding a newspaper and stuff like that. And I think that, the first part of the movie where they're it's in New York, right?
New York, yeah.
That's very, a little bit of American Gothic / industrialism. That's really kind of interesting to see that play. And then you sort of go back in time when they travel to England, and it's the plumbing is terrible, the building is falling apart, and it's cool to see that kind of jump back. And what Edith comes from. She's used to New York, and she's used to, a certain amount of efficiency, and she's sort of thrown backward into this life that they have.
Right. So when Tom and Lucille come, the whole reason that he goes on this diatribe against her writing after the really beautiful dance scene, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Which is, the soundtrack there is gorgeous. Her costuming there is gorgeous.
She looks perfect, and I hate to describe a woman as perfect.
No, she does
literally looks perfect.
She is the angel in the house in that moment. She is the Victorian ideal. The dad basically says, stay away from my daughter. Yeah. And so Thomas makes a scene because he's like, I'm doing what the father's asking. And then, conveniently, the father is murdered, and we don't see who.
I cannot watch that scene.
We don't see who does it, but
we know eventually.
We know. It was something that Guillermo del Toro talks about, is that he really wanted to make it clear that all of the men in the film are completely useless.
Yeah, nice one.
That was something he said specifically that just...
Except for the Hoctor, who turns out not to be useless, basically. But he is not
she has to save him. Yeah. And that was important for him. And I think we're going to get to that eventually in one of the articles that I brought to sort of share.
Going back to the father, though, briefly, he gives her a pen as a sort of, he means it to be a celebratory gift, but she ends up not being able to publish her work. But the pen is hugely foreshadowing because she uses that pen later, and it's like the pen is mightier than the sword, and you find out why at the end of the film when she stabs Lucille in the upper chest with it.
And not only that, she does end up publishing because in the end credits, you see that the novel is based, that they put that the fictional character wrote the novel that the film is based off of.
Right, which is very clever.
Is a nice nod.
It's a little meta. I love it.
I do too. Okay, so the father dies, and then they go to England, and then you get this house, which, before we even get into the plot that takes place, I want to talk just a little bit about the house that they built, because...
You noticed something about it that I did not.
A lot of the interviews around this film were talking about the construction of the set, because it is a physical set, 100%. They built the entire thing. It's a 3.5-story house.
Good God.
It's crazy. He said, when it comes to the design of the film, like costumes and the house itself, he says a lot of directors see that as sort of eye candy. He's like, for me, it's eye protein, is the way he described it. And
he would.
That there are motifs that carved into the wood of the house that you see on the costumes. That there are silhouettes of human figures and human faces all over in the furniture. That the color of the walls, not only is that what they're wearing, but that Lucille's eyes are the color of the house. Like, he wanted it to be so that, like, Lucille is the house, and just to get all of those pieces in there. That the windows are shaped like eyes, so it's like it's looking at you. There's a hallway that they spend a lot of time in that is shaped to look like a head and a torso, so it's like a body, and then it's covered with spikes, so it's like it's eating.
It's like
it's that sort of thing.
Iron Maiden almost.
Yeah, and the house itself is an amalgamation of different styles. Like, the front is a Gothic structure. The cellar is from, like, the Romantic period. The foyer with the giant staircase is Gothic revival, is what he calls it. And... I mean, just the detail they went into this house. And it literally is supposed to breathe. Like, the house has mechanisms in it to breathe. When Lucille is upset, when she's angry, the house breathes with her. Like, and one of the things Jessica Chastain talked about in conjunction with that when they were at this panel is just that Lucille gets her power from being in the house. Like, when they're in society, she is subject to what Thomas is saying. And she even says to him, I don't think this is the one. And Thomas says, you have to trust me. And then when they're back at the house, she's the one who slowly gains power, and her clothing gets bigger and wider. And the furniture that Mia sits in, or Mia Wakizura, who plays Edith, they built the furniture in several different sizes so that it looked like it swamped Edith.
Oh, how funny. I thought it looked pretty big.
Yeah. So,
interesting.
And then it'd be normal size for the others, because this is Lucille's domain, and Edith is supposed to get small, and we find out that, like, she might get small, but, like, small and mighty as the film goes on. So they return to this house, and Edith, I remember, is sexually frustrated because she wants to, be with her husband, and it's just not happening, and she's with these siblings, and they keep giving her tea. Which we find out is poisoned, which, I mean...
Great. Another parallel with Dragonwyck.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Dragonwyck was definitely a very direct inspiration, I think, for a lot of this. And then the painting, too. Like, there's a painting of the mother, and there's, like, that painting in Dragonwyck. And then Roger Corman's House of Usher, which was post-Dragonwyck. But, I mean, you definitely see that influence.
Oh, absolutely.
In the film.
Especially the saturation and the kind of stagey atmosphere and the implied incest. And here we get it, the real thing.
Do you want to get the specific plot details of what happens in the house up to the reveal? Because I can't recall if it's anything super important.
So we kind of went over a little bit of how they meet, and Thomas is, basically trying to get money so he can start mining that hideous red clay at Crimson Peak, and that's very kind of industrial age stuff, and he's talking about this little machine, and he's like, the father's like, oh, it's basically a toy, it's not, you're just dreaming, and then he holds his hands, these are the softest hands I've ever felt, and I thought that was both kind of sexy, but also very sad that, this poor guy is like, he's from this privilege, and he really kind of, I feel like Thomas wants to...
He's stuck in the past, but he's in love with the future. And that's also played out in his relationships. That's something that
that's a good way to put
says.
Yeah.
Because I think Tom Hiddleston says that, like, he's stuck in this relationship with his sister and, like, his family and this past, but he's eventually is in love with Edith.
Yeah. I mean, and then Edith notes, oh, hey, his clothes are beautiful and finely, stitched and everything, but they're like years old. And so it's kind of a nod to not just because he's stuck in the past, but also the fact that they just don't have any money. And so that's a big clue why they're, going after yet another socialite or daughter of someone who's rich or an investor or whatever. And then the waltz, we talked about the waltz a little bit with the candle, which was quite stunning and kind of, I think, a little bit symbolic of the way she's kind of swept away by him. And the way he's kind of swept away by her, and like later in the film, after they're married, when they're actually at Crimson Peak, he says, you're very different. And she says, oh, to who? And he goes, to everyone. I mean, he really means Edith, or he really means Lucille, but she is different. And that is, so I think he's swept away by her and her beauty, to the point where...
And her spirit. She might be the light.
Yeah, and he's also torn between... I mean, I feel like for a while he even forgets that they are going to literally just marry her into the family and basically murder her after they get the money. And I feel like he forgets that sometimes in the film. And obviously the dance scene is definitely their own little encapsulated world. And their sort of like sense of peace for like 5 minutes before things start to get crazy.
Mm-hmm. It's like that scene in the Keira Knightley Pride and Prejudice where she and Darcy are dancing and then everyone else disappears. That's what it feels like when you're watching them, even though no one else in the room disappears.
And that's a Dragonwyck scene, too, that we talked about last week.
Mm-hmm. The dance. Although they add the whole thing where a good partner will hold a candle and they'll do the waltz and the flame won't run out.
I love the detail in this movie in terms of, like, Victorian objects. And, like, you can relate that to object theory. And I'm not going to get into that because I don't have a reference that I can quote right now. But, there's the ghost photography they talk about in the beginning. And, I absolutely love the sunglasses. I am a slut for 19th century sunglasses. They are so gorgeous. They're just so cute. And
I feel like that needs snaps.
I completely. Reason. I mean, the whole thing, if you literally, you could look at this film and literally just analyze all of the objects, the photography, the glasses. And I don't mean the costumes, I mean all the little objects and all the little toys that he builds in his little workshop upstairs. That's fantastic too. You don't really see a lot of that, but even that is just, and he can only make toys, which I find to be really fascinating. Because it kind of is like, yeah, he's pretty much stuck as that child in a weird sort of way. He's never really gotten out of that because he can't get out of his relationship with his sister. Yikes.
One of the articles, just as long as we're talking about the spirit photography quick, is called Ghosts Are Movies, A Love Letter to Crimson Peak. And it has some really beautiful stuff in here. And it sort of talks about, first of all, the era that it takes place, 1901, with spirit photography. And because this spirit photography and stuff was commonplace, they sort of relate that to movies themselves. And what they say is, quote, in fact, photographs and audio recordings are present in the movie as literal manifestation of ghosts, a sigil they point towards, something Del Toro makes certain to include. Despite being an extraordinary technological advance that would transform how humans perceive the world for millennia, the invention of photography was immediately claimed for spirit photography. In our own era, we are making horror films about video recordings and cell phones in which the supernatural materializes.
Right.
Thus, all movies are ghosts, for any audiovisual recording is of a moment that occurred in the past.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Who writes that article?
This was written by Aaron Stewart and it was published on Medium.
Wow, okay, I need to read that later. That's an incredible quote.
He goes on to kind of get a little bit wider, and I'll just include that here in case. So after that sentence, he says, as William Gibson writes, we are that strange species that constructs artifacts intended to counter the natural flow of forgetting. And I myself wonder why we are in an age where technology augments all our memories, but our culture as a whole seems to forget everything quicker. In Del Toro's reckoning, there are ghosts and monsters, and their nature is not one and the same. There's a definite subversion of the nature of ghosts in Crimson Peak. They're indeed monstrous upon sight, decaying in corrupted flesh, anatomically exposed and bearing vicious wounds, but most importantly, they are not, as in so many ghost stories, manifestations of Edith's guilt. Rather, her alienated sensitivity to the world has made the echoes of their terrorized past apparent. The ghosts, the monsters on the surface, are humanized, so we're haunted by these ghosts. I think what it's trying to get at is how film, in a way, sort of immortalizes this fictitious trauma, and how it's something that we constantly are haunted by when we rewatch it.
Yeah,
which is really interesting. And then it ends how, in a small grace note, Del Toro shows us how we can escape the benevolent ghosts reach out to us from stories, and how like she's able to write that story at the end.
And I don't know, I don't have the direct quote, but I feel at some point GDT was like, basically the horror in this movie is child abuse. I feel like that's the crux of it. I feel like he said that at some point.
Oh yeah, I mean the real villains, I think he says in his eyes, are the mother and the father, like the Sharp's mother and their father. Who we want to get into that part. So I think from what I recall, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because you just watched this movie, there is growing tension between the three. Thomas and Edith go off and end up snowed in somewhere, and then they have sex for the first time.
Hiddlebutt.
And what is interesting is that he said it was important, quote, "I think it's important to show the heroine fucking and surviving." And he said that. And that it was through their love act that they both gain power. Because normally in a horror movie, if a girl sleeps with someone, she's going to die. And he's like, no, for here, it was a way of giving Edith some power back in terms of her relationship. And for Thomas, I think it was sort of, he becomes more focused and more sure of what it is that he wants. And then so they return to the house. And Lucille notices that this has happened, and this is kind of where the cracks really start. Oh man,
she really flips out. She's gonna attack her, and then that saucepan of whatever she's cooking goes all over the table, and then she's like picking it up with her hand, she's squishing it, and it's just really, it's gross, and you can see how like unhinged she is.
Well, and what's interesting, so in the Toxic Google panel, is Jessica Chastain watched the movie after she was in it, and her thing was like she kind of sees Thomas as the villain, or that was her instinct, like, because Thomas is so selfish is how she saw it, because and she, I mean, occupied the role of Lucille for so long.
Absolutely.
She's like, because everything Lucille does is for him. And what does she get at the end?
Yeah, pretty much nothing. But, you know, I'm so, God, Lucille, I'm so torn about her in the best possible way. Like, I think that Jessica Chastain, like, just nailed it. I simultaneously cannot stand this character, but I also feel very sorry for her in a lot of ways. I mean, 100%. She initiated the abuse, you could say, between her and her brother because she's the older one. But at the same time, they were both abused. They're both very isolated. So it's like there's a certain amount of it for, you know, what happened that you can't blame her for because of the circumstances. So it's very complex, and you can't really say that you fully hate her or you fully like her because it's just so messed up.
And her relationship with Thomas is the only way she's able to exhibit power in the world, because that's just what the reality was for women. Women had power because of the men they were connected to.
Absolutely, yeah.
So do you want to go into the details of the abuse or what the ghosts reveal? Because I don't remember that, and you just watched it.
From what I remember, it was, Lucille did actually have a child by Thomas, but the child was born, I think, prematurely or very ill, and the wife at the time tried to nurse the kid back to health, and it didn't work. And I don't remember if Lucille killed her or what, but at one point, that's one of the ghosts that Edith sees is like floating kind of in the middle of the big kind of foyer rotunda thingy. And it's a woman holding a baby. So I think it's two things. Lucille wants a child for whatever reason, for her own sake, but at the same time, having an heir to their basically dying family, whatever's left of it, is a big deal. I mean, hence looking for a wife. Yeah, and it's the same. It's a Dragonwyck comparison completely. So it's a combination of a lot of different things. And it's very creepy and very sad. And you look at it going, not pathetic as in, oh, you're pathetic, but it is, oh my gosh, that's so pathetic because it's just so deeply saddening, you know?
Right. And just in case we didn't make it clear, Thomas and Lucille are having an incestuous relationship and have had it for quite some time. One of the things they talked about, because you brought up the ghost with the baby, and this kind of circles back to the idea that the ghosts are ultimately trying to help Edith, even though they appear monstrous, and the real monsters are the Sharps. Is that, and Guillermo del Toro said the ghosts are always trying to reach out and warn her, and he's like, and that's what makes it ironic that first ghost she runs into has their tongue cut off so they can't say anything. And it's finally, it takes the mother before Edith is finally, the mother ghost appearing for Edith to figure out what is actually going on.
She gets her first little clue, though, when they're in the kitchen and Thomas is like, oh yeah, that's what when it snows, you'll be able to see why they call this place Crimson Peak. And she's like, what? Because her mother, the ghost of her own mother, had warned her, beware of Crimson Peak. And she's kind of made that connection that her mother is sort of prophesying what is going to happen to her. And she's like, oh, I'm a little creeped out. I think tears even come to her eyes because she's so freaked out. And then eventually she gets all the clues from the ghosts and figures that out herself. But that's the initial kind of ping that something's not right.
An essay I want to write, or even just a topic I want to explore more, is I love the fact that even though the mother is dead, the mother still has a presence.
Yeah.
And the mother, like Edith's mother even, is so present in all the film because of that warning you get at the beginning, and how the mother is still able to survive when the father just falls off the face of the earth and we never see about him again. The mother continues on. And that would be interesting to consider, and an interesting way to sort of approach a revitalization of the genre, I should say. What does the sharp ghost mother say? What happens in that scene? I can't remember.
I think she calls out Lucille, possibly. And I remember at one point...
Did Lucille murder her mother?
With an axe. To her head. Yeah.
Okay, so explain the background of the Sharp family quickly.
So the Sharp family, super, super quick, and this is at one point where the love of my life, Brent Gorman, appears on the scene again as the detective, and he's talking to the Hochters character, we just mentioned, played by Charlie Hunnam, and says, hey, your father, Edith's father was looking into this, and basically this is what I've uncovered, is there's a newspaper article talking about the Sharp children, that their mother was found in the bathtub with an axe through her head. And the long and the short of it is, essentially Lucille was the one wielding the axe. And it turns out it's probably just because of child abuse, basically. And so she's defending her and her brother by axing their mother. So you can kind of forgive her for that, because there's a reason why I think she was like 14 at the time. You can understand the reason behind that. And so they say that I think Thomas goes to boarding school eventually, and then I think she's packed off to an asylum. But then they get back together again at some point. I forget how old they are when they're united, but at that point, then the incest begins and all that stuff. But they don't get into that with the newspaper article. But that's the story, and that's actually arguably, I think it's the first ghost that she, Edith runs into. So she's taking a bath with the charming British plumbing that doesn't work. And she gets out and, she drapes her little shawl over her. And then all of a sudden, she sees there's a ghost behind her. I don't think she sees it right away. In another scene, the ghost of the mother, like bloody ghost, it's hideous, played by, obviously, Doug Jones.
We love Doug Jones.
Doug, I love you. So literally crawls out of the floor and is saying,
it's amazing.
I think she's saying Lucille, basically. But, she's just crawling along the floor in agony, obviously just being, having been axed by her own daughter. And so then I think she starts to piece things together, and she even talks to Thomas. Hey, were there any specific, very violent deaths in this house? Because I just ran into some ghosts. And he's like, now's not a good time, honey. So, yeah, I mean, that's a lot. So you find that out maybe halfway through the film or a little bit later, but then you start to piece together why all this has happened. And so, of course, without the parents, I mean, they're really left to their own devices in that house, and they have no real money. And so the only way is to, get women and essentially murder them for their fortunes.
And then, so Edith finally, once she figures that out, catches Thomas and Lucille in an amorous embrace. You don't really see anything.
No,
which is nice.
I think she has her hand down his trousers, though. But she's horrified for multiple reasons, I think partly because of in a way, the betrayal, just as much as the actual incestual act.
And then you get this chase sequence. And I don't remember how the events happen, but Lucille tries to get Edith to sign over her property. Edith stabs Lucille with a pen and runs away. Thomas comes in and says, you should have known that eventually this was going to happen.
Yeah,
and basically. Then Lucille stabs Thomas in the face with a knife.
Oh, yep. I remember watching that movie in the theater going, she's going to stab him, isn't she? Where is she going to stab him? Oh, she stabbed him in the face.
That bothered me. I was like, why the face? Just, gut him. And, if you're going to try and kill your brother, just...
I think the face was so poignant, though.
I guess it's more artsy, but if you're going to try and actually kill someone...
Yeah, but you got a lot of nerve endings in the face, though. Like,
she
gets him right in the maxillaries. That hurts, man. That's
okay.
Yeah.
Does she? He doesn't bleed out from the face.
No, he pulls it out, which I had a hard time watching.
How does he die?
I forget. I think, does she stab him again? I actually wrote it. I took notes as I was watching, going, okay, so and so stabs so and so. Wait, where did I'm getting lost. So Edith stabs Lucille. Lucille stabs Thomas. I feel like it's a tongue twister. And then I think, how does he die of his injuries? I think I know what it is. She's killed him, but you don't really get to see that because she kind of comes out of the back, or it comes out of their little room. Edith knows that Thomas is dead because it's Lucille who flies out of the room at her. And then there's a bit where she like cuts off Lucille's fingers because she's in hot pursuit, and it's like this very bloody, exchange happening.
They're running all over the place. Charlie Hunnam shows up and he gets hurt, and Edith is like, so
the Hoctor shows up when he's suspicious. He travels to England. He gets there right as things are starting to get dirty, and Edith, in her state of mind, falls off the balcony down and hurts her leg, and so luckily the doctor's there to kind of help her, and then is like, hey, you know what, we're leaving, this is insane, and then of course Lucille stabs him like right in the side, and then Lucille is like, Thomas, you got to go finish him off, we can't, this is going to ruin all our plans. And so Thomas is really cool. Thomas goes up to the doctor, I think his name is Alan, and says, hey, kind of whispers to him almost, you're a doctor, where can I stab you so I won't kill you, basically. And he kind of points to the right direction, and then Thomas just puts the knife in. And that's like...
That was so cool.
God, it's painful, but I feel like that's super sad because, like, Thomas doesn't really have any male relationships at all. He doesn't have any friends. His father is gone.
He is an emo teenager. That's how Guillermo del Toro described him. He's like, Thomas is an emo teenager.
He actually said emo teenager?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Like, emotionally. Like, that's what his character is.
Oh, absolutely. So, and of course Lucille kills the dog too. And Guillermo is not afraid of shying away from that kind of thing. Other directors would like, oh, the dog lives, but he's like, nope. She's going to snap the dog's neck.
Yeah. And so Lucille chases Edith out into the wintry peak. And so you see the red clay.
Bleeding onto the white snow.
Right. And she's like, you have to kill me to stop this, is what Lucille says. And she's like, you're all alone. No one can help you. And then Edith says, I'm not alone. And she's like, he's right behind you. Or turn around. Like, look at him. And you see the specter of Thomas looking at her. And, like, Lucille, like, visibly is, like, upset by it. And, like... The cheek wound is still kind of bleeding.
And into the air, which is so cool, like smoke.
Yeah. And then she turns back and she's like, you're going to have to kill me. You have to do it. And then Edith just like smacks her over the head with a shovel.
And then goes, I heard you the first time. It's very, is that kind of Final Girl?
Would you say a little bit. I mean, I don't feel like you can put a Final Girl thing on a gothic romance because Final Girls only really work when it's a killer chasing after a bunch of people.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. But I mean, what a badass moment.
And then she gets like a tender sort of goodbye with Thomas's ghost, which is sweet.
And that's the way it had to end anyway. He's already damned before he meets her.
Yeah.
Which is terribly painful. But then she's got the Hoctor as backup, and they just leave. They leave right off into the sunset,
They leave as like the police are coming because they know something is up, because they always do. Yeah. And then the film ends with sort of this overlay of Edith sort of talking about ghosts are real here. I don't know what the exact quote is.
The image goes back to the very beginning, because you get the image of her bloodied in that big white nightgown with her hair kind of a mess, and she's killed Lucille in self-defense.
Exactly from the beginning. And I think the eeriest part of the movie is then it zooms in and it travels through the house, and you get into the back sort of living room area, and you turn the corner, and Lucille's ghost is there in her blue gown playing the piano. Like,
boy, that's sad.
Ugh,
and you know that those ghosts are going to be stuck there until the house literally collapses.
Yeah.
Which it probably will soon.
Yeah, no, it's tragic. It's beautiful. It's so eerie. It's just, it's a great ending. And I think another thing that I thought was really interesting from this Google Talks interview, you see, is he said, I want to make the audience ambivalent about the villains. Like, I don't want you to hate them. I don't want it to be a horror thing where, like, you want either the villains to kill the people or for the villains to get killed.
There is no stand-in evil stock character.
Yeah, there is no knowledge of, like, a greater good and evil, which falls in with that ghost thing. It's just sort of this tragedy. And it's just done so well. And so, in spite of all the terrible things Lucille and Thomas have done, I mean, at least for me sitting in the theater, I was devastated for them. Because, they're not... Yeah. You don't like them because they're not great characters.
Well, they do make negative choices. And I think this is a really interesting thing, a commentary, I think, on child abuse, is that some people who have gone through child abuse turn it around and do not repeat the abuse. And some people do. And these people obviously clearly repeat that. And, initially it was not their fault. So you do have a lot of sympathy for them in so many ways because their childhood was so f***ed up.
Well, and so dealing with trauma, I think, is kind of a through line in almost all of Guillermo del Toro's works, which I find really interesting, especially because Pan's Labyrinth and The Devil's Backbone, I think, were two of the films previously. I think Pacific Rim is in there, but that also deals with childhood trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes up. I mean, you and I both went to see The Exhibit, and
the At Home with Monsters.
There's an entire room full of childhood experiences, and they're pretty much all negative.
Yeah,
and it's triggering. I mean, I walked through there, and my eyes were brimming with tears the whole time.
Right. Well, and The Devil's Backbone, childhood trauma.
Yep.
There's trauma in The Shape of Water. It's not child related, but I mean, all these characters are traumatized because they're other.
Absolutely.
It's just this really interesting through line. And there's a video that's unrelated to what I was trying to find for this film, and I think we might be able to get into it a bit more with Pan's Labyrinth when we discuss that. But they sort of talk about how the villains are inextricably tied to the material and how it's the supernatural that sort of frees you to not move past or finally lay the trauma to rest, but if you're tied to the material. So that's, I mean, we should have known walking in. Then if you saw that theme, you should know walking in of how Lucille and Thomas are tied in at this house. It's not going to end well.
Yeah.
So I think sort of one of the final things I wanted to discuss was just this interview that I found on Jezebel with, who is it? Kelly Faircloth and Guillermo del Toro. And he talks a lot about the things that we've been discussing. And one of the things that I didn't mention at the beginning, because I forgot, but it's super interesting, is he writes biographies at the start of each project for each of the characters and gives them to the actors.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it's like birthday, favorite food, like all of these random things. And sort of kind of jumpstart that process. But those biographies are what he also gives to like the costumer and the production design. Oh. And then so once he gives it to like the heads of his artistic team, they sit down and say, how can we make the environment reflect these characters and reflect the story that we're telling?
Yeah. Which
I find super interesting. And Gothic romance as a whole. He says, quote, one of the guys that I love and revere is Henry James. And Henry James, of course, his novels are about the clash of modernity of the West and the traditions of Europe. But he was also a great student of Gothic romance, which he sort of, how would you say, de-analyzed in Turn of the Screw and broke it down to its intimate parts and rearranged it. What he said about Gothic romance is that it's about the clash of the future and the past, and the ghost represents the past, which is what we were saying earlier. I think Gothic romance deals with those things, melancholy and loss, better than anything else other than horror and fairy tales, to which it's very closely related. I really think the idea of melancholy is essential to Gothic romance. It was birthed out of a melancholic gaze towards the past, and while it was contemplating runes in an engraving, that the idea of the first Gothic novel came to mind. So I think in the same way, there's a poetry of the past that is lost that attracts me so much. Even in a movie like Pacific Rim, which is presumably about a future, to me the entire interest that I had was about the past, and everything is sort of in its decay. And then he says, what I think is interesting is that Edith is a girl from the future that sees ghosts, that sees the past, and she falls in love with a guy that lives in a land steeped in the past but sees the future machines. They're opposite and they love each other. To me, the real monsters in Crimson Peak are the parents, the mother and the portrait and the absent father. Because I do believe that family is the source of all the love and all the horror in our life.
Legit.
Jessica Chastain was the first person that he cast in the film, and he said everything else sort of just fell into place after that.
Ah, interesting.
And that initially he put her like as you would be an Edith, and she's like, no, I want to be Lucille. And so she was sort of typecast against it. I think sort of
a very meaty role.
Yeah, so, everything Guillermo del Toro says about this movie and films in general is just amazing. And we're going to get into so much more of that in delTOber.
Yeah.
But I think for me, the things that I leave with is really, I'm just so drawn and inspired by the way he uses and views ghosts as sort of harbingers of dealing with the past rather than sort of embodiments of good or evil.
Yeah.
I think he does a really good job of showing the fractures trauma causes and that evil sometimes isn't black and white. You know, in certain films, like, for instance, in Pan's Labyrinth, Vidal is very evil, full stop.
Yeah.
But here, there are people doing evil things, but they aren't necessarily intrinsically evil people. And things I want to sort of think about moving forward in regards to this movie, I do want to go back and watch these movies that inspired him, like Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, The Spiral Staircase, because those I haven't seen. And I'm curious, and this is what I think, the one thing that stuck out to me while I was watching this movie that might require further contemplation that I could potentially see as being a troublesome point is that I don't know how much this film works to undo the angel-whore dichotomy. Because granted, Mia Wakizawa's character has sex, but it's within a marital relationship.
Yeah.
And even, down to the coloring of she's in this white nightgown. She has blonde hair. She wears white. She could not more clearly be the angel. And I don't think it's done insidiously here. I think it's an element of gothic romance, but I also don't see it as necessarily... It works within the mold, but it doesn't... As someone who has read so much Victorian gothic literature, in my opinion, the only possible complaint I could have about this movie is it doesn't do enough to break apart that dichotomy, which, unfortunately, the angel horror trope chases us. It's still present in films to this day.
It's hard to get rid of, for sure.
It's super hard to get rid of.
And also, if you're going to be influenced, as GDT is, by Jane Eyre and anything that the Brontes have written, this movie screams Bronte. I do not have a problem with that, but if you're going to try to get rid of the whole angel horror trope, it's going to be hard when you're influenced by them. But I think he does dismantle it, like you said, in the sense that she does have sex, but at the same time, like you said, it's in the confines of marriage, so it's not quite as revolutionary. Yeah, it's not as transgressive, but it's still transgressive a little bit.
Yeah, especially for that time. Just quick thing about the Brontes. I was looking at Crimson Peak on Tumblr yesterday just to see what I could find. And Lifetime in a Fist they described this movie as basically what would happen if all three Bronte sisters got hammered and wrote a book with Lord Byron in it. It's there's never been a better...
That's 100% true.
That's the best summary of anything I think I've ever read.
That's pretty... it encapsulates the spirit of the whole thing.
100%.
It really does. Okay, so my final thoughts.
Yes.
I have so many thoughts. I could talk about every aspect of this movie.
I could talk about Guillermo del Toro for the rest of my life and not get bored of it.
I have an editing job ahead of me because we have discussed so much, and we were going to try to keep the episodes short-ish.
We were, and we need to eat pizza now.
But we have been talking about this for an hour, and I gotta cut it out. But I love this film so much. There are parts that obviously I have a hard time watching. Some of the violent acts are hard for me to watch just because I'm a sensitive person. But I think that they're not senseless. They're very, very important. This movie is in many ways about destruction. It's about a visceral connection that you have with feeling. This movie is so full of emotion, and that's what I love. That's why I keep going back to it. I watched it, yesterday and a little bit today, as if I'd almost never seen it before. Obviously I knew the plot and it really stuck with me, but you notice new things. It's so rich. It's so rich that, I could talk about it forever. I think in terms of my rating, I would actually give it 10 out of 10 both times.
Yeah, I think
my personal 10 out of 10, but also the kind of a technical 10 out of 10 for all that the film does. The acting, the production, the costumes, the design, the music, the script. Absolutely everything is to me. I think it's just a pretty much perfect film.
I would agree. I feel bad. I feel dirty even saying I would give it maybe a 9.5 out of 10 because I do think it's 10 out of 10 on so many things like production design and costume design and everything. I think I have to sit with it some more, but there were still some story elements that I didn't think coalesced quite as nicely as I would have liked them to. I can't give you a reason why in particular. I think it is just because where the film starts and where it ends, and expectations too, and the way the family thing sort of like there's just sort of there's still a disconnect for me that I think it was intentional between the new world and the old that didn't work quite as well. Like that blurring didn't work for me only because I spent so much time in this world that seeing it different was like, doesn't mean it's bad, but it's different. Yeah. And like Jane Eyre is my favorite novel, so I'm like a weird purist in that way.
No, not at all.
I think kind of a final thought though, when you say immediately when you said what I love about this film is its emotion. One of the things Guillermo del Toro got really passionate about at the end of his TED Talk was talking about how in our world today we are almost in Victorian times when it comes to the fear and dismissal of love. We are reticent to talk about emotion, and it is smart to be a skeptic or a cynic, and it's completely dangerous and almost unheard of to be vulnerable when it comes to feelings, when it comes to believing in a feeling or something like that. And he said, and what he said, and I couldn't believe he said it, but he's like, that's why, look at the success of Twilight. That's why Twilight is so popular. The only way to talk about the fantasy of love is in the Gothic, which speaks to our times. Because the love story, as twisted as it is in here, you don't get the sort of authentic love story in other films.
You don't get that passion. I really don't think I mean, that's another reason I'm drawn to it, because of that deep passion that, you know, it's something I do want out of maybe a romance or an action film, and you never really see it like this.
No, and out of just, this is why I continue to go back to him as a director, because of the passion and the emotion and the sincerity that he pours into it and that you receive out of it, because his films are never films that have sort of that glossy sheen. He's not making his films to make money, to further the brand, anything like that. He is telling stories for the soul, and, you know, you can tell when you're watching this, or when you're watching, like, a Pacific Rim, there is an emotive difference between that and, like, a Marvel superhero movie. There just is.
I'm interested that you say that because you're a Marvel fan.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I love the Marvel movies, but I can enjoy watching them and also realize how shallow they are.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, I get that a little bit.
Because at the end of the day, those movies are a product. This is art. And, I mean, there's, like, Black Panther was, like, there's films like Black Panther and, like, for me, Wonder Woman and the early Batman movies that are definitely exceptions to that, but the vast majority of the time in the superhero culture.
But Guillermo crafts these worlds in a way that goes beyond, I want to direct the actors this way. No, he has his hands in every single pie. Yeah. He's like, this is what I want from the visuals. This is what I want from the sound. This is what I want to... I mean, you look at it and you don't see the seams. You don't see the border of the picture. You are thrown into the painting.
It is a world. And that's something Tom Hiddleston and Jessica Chastain sort of talked about, how in the physicality of everything you step onto the set, it's like you're in a different world. Wow. And that's where you live and you occupy. And it was claustrophobic for them because they're in this house for 6 weeks. And at the end of the day, just reiterates for me that until the end of time, I will be upset. And if you can hear this, I'm smacking my desk emphatically that we did not get the Guillermo del Toro Hobbit. And that is something you are going to hear me say in so many future episodes. I can't even tell you.
When we get to the Lord of the Rings movies and the Hobbit movies, we're going to be talking about GDT a little bit.
Of course. So I think that's everything. I mean, I think this film... Yeah, I think it's
brought out our passion. We're talking for a long time.
I know, and like with the beach movie episode, it was much harder too. Whereas like the next few episodes are going to be beefy because we just love DDT so much. So next week we're going to be doing Pan's Labyrinth, which was the first Del Toro movie I ever saw, and I have just visceral memories of the first time I saw that movie because when you experience a delTOber. Oh my gosh. A Del Toro movie for the first time, it is unlike anything you see because it just engages your heart and soul in a way that a lot of films don't. Like when we saw The Shape of Water together, I mean, these films are like lightning in a bottle. You do not get this from most.
Yeah, you don't.
If not the vast majority of directors.
Yeah, these are works of art. Well, we hope you've enjoyed our first installment of
delTOber. So we will see you next time, and until then, beware the Crimson Peak.